Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, today we're going to start just a little tiny mini series with Windows 7 reaching end of life, people starting to look around at other options. How can you best test out Linux without destroying your current build? We don't want to wipe everything out and go right into it unless that's exactly what you want to do. And so I want to talk about a couple different things, and it's kind of iffy. Which one do I do first? Do I do getting started with VirtualBox first, or do I want to do testing out different distros? We're just going to go ahead and do this one here. We'll start with the library or the VirtualBox, and then we'll jump over to the general getting started one first. So the first couple steps I will not be able to show you on the screen because these are going to be different for every computer. But when you are using VirtualBox, you need to make sure that virtualization is enabled in your computer. This is something that you do in the BIOS. So depending on your computer, you can get to a boot menu with F9 on most HPs, F12 on most other computers, some computers that might be F10. This will get you a boot menu. One of the options should be get to your setup. Also, either delete or escape or F2 on startup will also get you to the BIOS screen. You need to figure out how for your model computer to get into the BIOS screen. Once you get in there, you need to find, and it's either going to be in settings or advanced settings, you need to find virtualization or virtualization hypervisor. You need to enable this. Most modern computers can do this. They just have it disabled by default. So you need to get in there. Now, if you have Windows 10, they have this fun, exciting thing in Windows 10 where you really can't access those menus unless you set the computer's ability to do that. So if you're in Windows 10, to get into your BIOS screen, you're going to have to boot the computer, and then somewhere in the settings, and I forget exactly where it is, somewhere in the settings, you will find an option for boot into BIOS or boot into repair. You need to boot into something other than the operating system. Boot into safe mode maybe. One of these options is going to give you the ability to boot the computer into the BIOS. Now, another thing while you're in the BIOS, if you're going to be experimenting with Linux distributions, you might want to go ahead and disable Secure Boot. If the Secure Boot is enabled, you will not be able to boot the computer off of another operating system. Okay, now what we're doing here with Virtual Machine, you do not need to do that specifically because we're running the virtualization on top of it. Of course, if your computer is low spec, you're not going to be able to run Virtual Machine. You're going to need something with it, probably at least 8 gigs of RAM and you know at least a few processing cores to pull off good virtualization. Now, I'm going to go ahead and address a few other things in here as well while we are getting started on the topic. One of these is there's a few different software devices. We're looking at VirtualBox. There's also GNOME boxes, which you can use if you are on Linux. And there is VMware, which is another cross-platform like VirtualBox. The reason I use VirtualBox is because it is an open source application. It is easy to install on everything, and it has a licensing that will allow me to actually show you in videos without buying a commercial license. Hey, licensing is always something to keep in mind. So with this, you've gone into your BIOS, you have enabled virtualization in your computer. From this point here, we're going to be a fairly similar process the rest of the way through. So what we're going to do is we want to navigate on over to the VirtualBox website. Now, if you're already in Linux, of course, you can just download Virtual Machine from your repositories, from your software center. It should be there already. If you are on Windows or on Mac, just head on over to virtualbox.org and you can come over here and hit this download button. Now, my version of VirtualBox that I have here is still version 5. There's not significant differences between 5 and 6. 6 is definitely going to work better. I'm still on 5 because I hold back the packages on this particular streaming computer. I do have VirtualBox 6 running on my other computer, and it's all of the steps I'm going to show you here today are going to be effectively the same. All right, so just go ahead and click on your download button. You can download the copy of VirtualBox. When you land over here, this is basically the download pages. So if you're downloading for a Windows application or a Windows computer, here's your OS 10, your Linux distributions. Again, just grab your Linux distributions from the repositories. You'll see this is actually going to a Linux wiki page, which is going to show you how to install this from a variety of different distributions. And there is Solaris hosts as well. The other thing that you will probably want to get while you're here, go ahead and download the VirtualBox extension pack. This is going to enable you to use USB 3 support and a few other odds and ends inside your system. I think the other one is a like a certain shared network controller. We won't get into that one here. But go ahead and download this. Now, this download here is going to download the current one for the current version. You have to match your extension pack version to your VirtualBox version. So make sure you're doing that. If you're downloading an older version, there is a older builds box here, and in the older builds box, again, you can see there's there's still some active maintenance. I don't remember if I'm in 5.1 or 5.2. I'm probably in the out of support 5.1, knowing me. If you head on over here, you can actually find the extension packs as well. So make sure you're matching all your numbers, 5.2.3.6, 5.2.3.4. You can see here's the download for each individual operating system. Here's the information for all of your different Ubuntu builds and your extension packs. The single extension pack works for all distributions, like all operating systems. So just the single extension pack. The extension pack is important for getting USB 3 support, but if you happen to have a situation where your computer is not booting correctly, it might actually be USB 3 support. I found sometimes kills the machine's ability to boot. So you might go ahead and toggle that button off for testing out a machine. So with that, you've downloaded it. You've gotten everything set up. Let's go ahead and dive on into the virtual machine window itself. So we'll go ahead and show you my desktop view here. Hey, hello everyone chatting on the comments. Let's go ahead and just move the... let's just go ahead and keep it there. Why not? Hey, you can see the comments. We are recording this one live. All right. So anyway, I have a variety of boxes here. Now, the ones on the top are basically my boxes for experimenting. The ones on the bottom are the ones that I use for quote unquote quasi-production. So of course I have my Unix. So if I'm over on this computer and I want to access the Tor network, I do it on Unix. If the computer's not on and I need to access the Tor network, I have a Tails USB drive I drop in. So Unix is a good way to access it. I have a Windows 10. This is what I actually use when I am doing Windows 10 stuff for clients. So that's the one there. This is a Linux Mint build. I think it's actually is running 19.3 now, if I remember correctly. It still says 19.1, but I think I did fully update this one. This is, there's actually some client work that I do inside this system. And then this is my Knoppix build, what I'm using to test out LaTeX and a few other things as well. So these ones are kind of my production. The ones at the top are my experimental. So these are the guys that I go ahead and just set up and just toggle when I'm doing new virtualization. So what we're going to do here is you can create the new, I'll just go ahead and edit the box that we have and walk through all the settings. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and talk about that extension pack, which I believe is under preferences. Go under File, Preferences. Under your extensions, you can see that I have the extension pack already installed. Oh, look at this. I am on 5.1. So, so this has USB 2, USB 3, host controller support, webcam support, VirtualBox, RDB, PXE-ROM, disk encryption. So that's what the extension pack is going to get you. To install the extensions, I believe you hit this button here, and then you're just going to download, navigate to where your extension pack happens to be, click it, hit open, and it's going to install your extension pack. That's nice and easy to do. Inside the rest of the general settings, this tells you where your VirtualBox VMs are at. So you can see here it's on my home folder under VirtualBox VMs. So I could actually navigate to my home folder. And here's my VirtualBox VMs right here. And this is where all those VMs are at. So if you wanted to come in here. So here I actually threw in a couple disks over here to attempt to install Windows 10 on a fresh disk on the 1909 without breaking my current disk, because you can actually hot swap these disks. I can take the disks off and throw them on. If you want to save a particular disk, you can just throw it off the system. There's snapshots in here. If there's actually virtual machine snapshots, you can go ahead and do that. So the snapshots will enable you to go back through and save a copy of the machine and then revert back to that old machine after you do something. Particularly good for Windows if you want to hold back versions. There you go. Anyway. So of course your input. So these are your variety of different hotkeys in here. Your languages, display adapters. So here's your maximum screen size. You can do automatic, none. You can set them in there. Now there's some, I think there's some issues with the current version of Virtual Machine where it does something goofy in here, and I can't remember exactly what it is. All right, so network stuff. So there's some host-only networks. You can do some interesting things with networking in here. Like you could set up a VM on this machine that could actually be accessed from any computer on my network. You could do something just by manipulating your networks in here. We're not going to do anything with that. That's a little bit more advanced. You don't need that to test out distributions. All right, so when you create a new system, it's going to give you a name, and then you want to select what it is. Is it Windows, Linux, Solaris, BSD, IBM OS 2, Mac OS 10, or other? And inside of each one of these, you'll get a drop-down list. Just pick the closest one to it. I've generally found it doesn't really matter what's in here as long as you're getting the 32 versus 64 right. So you can actually toggle between 32 and 64. There is an expert mode as well. This basically just gets you some of the settings in here that you might do, might toggle later. So this is your memory size. How much RAM does the system have? So I'm on this machine, I'm usually giving machines about 6 gigs because this system has 16. If I upgrade the RAM to 32, then I'll go up and give every system 8 gigs of RAM. We can add a virtual disk. So we can not add a virtual machine. So if you're doing something just USB support, super anonymous with some live keys, you can do that. You can create a new virtual hard disk, or you can go in and select an individual hard disk from any one of the individual windows that are available. So you can go ahead and do that. Now, we're not going to create a new disk here. Just go ahead and actually, let's just go through this step here. Hold on, go to expert mode here. We need to give it a name. Let's call this machine Delete Me, because I don't want to keep it around. So there's the create, hit the create button, and this is where you're going to create your file locations. This is the size of the virtual disk. On a Linux build, you can usually go down as low as 8. Windows build, you don't want to go any lower than 32. Then you can choose between the different things. So there's a virtual hard disk, VirtualBox disk image, virtual machine disk. So there's a variety of different things. You can just keep the virtual disk image here or the virtual hard disk. Either one, like any of these aren't going to be in any issues, but I just keep with the default VirtualBox disk image. I just find that that one works just fine. Now you do want to use dynamically allocated. If it's fixed size, it's going to immediately take up this much space on your actual disk right away. Dynamically allocated means that it goes up to that amount, but it doesn't actually take the space on your host machine's files until you actually use that much space in the virtual machine. Okay, so I keep that on dynamically allocated. I'm going to cancel this because I don't want to create a new machine. Everything from here, once the machine's created, it doesn't give you nearly the amount of settings that you want. So you're going to come back in here and adjust your settings. Now, under your basic general here, here's your name, your type. You can, of course, change your type. So since Peppermint is based on Ubuntu, I've just selected that as an Ubuntu 64. We have, this is where our snapshots are going to be held at. We have descriptions, and if you want to enable disk encryption for security, I don't, just because on my virtual machine, I'm usually just testing out distributions. I'm not actually doing any real client work or anything like that. Under your system, you can change your RAM up to be different sizes that you want. You can enable your boot order and change the boot order. You can actually set a floppy disk. Handy if you download old 3.5 inch disk images, which I've done before. Optical drive, hard disk. Now you can actually share your computer's optical CD drive. I'll show you how to do that in a bit here. And you can do a network card. And then I usually don't adjust any of these things unless I absolutely have to. So there's enable EFI for specific OSs that use EFI specifically. Under your processor, you can adjust your processing cores. I give all my guys 4 processing cores. And then under acceleration, I actually never mess with any of these before. So we're getting into those. Display. So on the GUI here, you can only go up to 128 megabyte for video memory support directly. In a terminal on Linux, you can do that. I am assuming in Windows, you can do the same thing through a command line. You can adjust how many monitors are supported, and you can scale it up. I usually enable 3D acceleration. There's you can enable a remote display. You can enable a video capture, which is going to capture your screen, and then you can select your frame rates and all the different items inside of here. Okay, so under your storage, we have a basic IDE controller. We have a basic SATA controller. So our IDE, you can see this is where we have a CD-ROM there. We have a new virtual disk image. This is just one of the disk images, a VirtualBox disk image. Is right here. You can actually you can add a whole new controller. I think, is this the new controller? So this is a new controller. So you could add a SCSI controller, a SAS controller, floppy, USB. You can add all these different controllers to it. You can actually, under select a different controller, you can add an individual disk. So if you want to have a multiple disk machine, you can do this, and you can select which disk is set up. Here's your audio. You can enable or disable, and then select your audio drivers. Your networking, you can enable or disable again. Now, if you're doing more advanced stuff, you might add additional network drivers, serial ports, USB ports. So here you can see I have USB 1.0 enabled. So if I actually wanted to do a lot with the USB ports, I might want to enable 2 or 3. This is the part where sometimes if I have 3 set, sometimes the distros won't boot. That could just be an issue with the extensions pack, whatever it happens to be. So if you're trying to boot a system and it's not booting right, the first thing to do, try disabling the USB controller support, or at least drop it down to 1.1 or 2 from 3. You can do shared folders. So if you want to share folders between your guest machine and your host machine, you can go ahead and do that. And then this will control what do you see on your user interface. You can toggle this off and you will not see the option to pull down the menu, or you can toggle it to show the menu. You can actually show or hide certain items from the individual menu there altogether as well. You can also pull up this menu here, which is going to be your basic controller menu, USB controller, monitor controllers, and things like that. Now, I mentioned you can go ahead and add whatever's in your CD drive. So you can find my optical drive here. And if you right-click your optical drive and choose host drive here, now whatever is in my CD-ROM here will actually now load into the virtual machine on my physical CD-ROM on my computer. So I can, of course, just leave that empty. Now, to boot into an individual operating system, just kind of click on here, and then we want to select our disk image. So these are a variety of different downloads that I have on various different distros that I have downloaded. So here's my Linux Mint 18.3. I can probably get rid of some of these guys. So since I'm running 18.3 of Cinnamon, I keep that around. Whatever I'm currently running in production anywhere, I keep a copy around. I can probably get rid of the 19.2s as I'm running 19.3 on my other production systems. We have some Farron OS there. There's some old candidate files. I can probably just delete those guys. But I can go ahead and pick something. So let's say, let's go, let's see, that's a net installer. Let's see, what's going to work? Let's go ahead and go with Linux Mint Debian Edition 3. So we go ahead and now drop this in the optical drive. We have a VirtualBox set. Just go ahead and hit the start button. And then what we're going to see here, oh, did I hit the start button? I don't think I hit the start button. It's going to go into a black screen. You can see I can hit F12 to select my boot. I missed it there. And then I can come over here now and just kind of do what I'm doing. I can start Linux Mint. I can boot from the local drive, which I think is set to Peppermint right now. So if I come over here and I can go ahead and hit the start, now this is going to boot up whatever is on this ISO. In this case, it should be a live key, which is going to enable me to test or install Linux Mint Debian Edition. Let's see what happens when this finishes its boot. All right, so here we are. Now, you might have a machine that starts like this. This is because Linux Mint Debian Edition was probably the worst choice I could pick here, because it does not actually enable our VirtualBox guest editions for resetting my screen size. So I'd actually have to enable that. I'm pretty sure I could not go in and change the screen resolution size. Let's go ahead and give that a try. My guess is it's going to say this is not an option. Unless that's, should that be a, yeah. Screen resolution not found. This was probably the worst distribution to boot up here because it doesn't boot full screen. But you can see here, I can test this machine out. I can try out all the different things. It's Linux Mint Debian Edition. I can go ahead and double click on this and install it. Let's just go ahead and run through that installer real quick. We're not going to actually install it. I'm just going to show you what it's going to look like here. All right, so let's go ahead and pick forward, forward, forward. I just want to get to the partition part. Okay. It's definitely not 1, 2, 3, by the way. Oh. Got to give it a host name. All right, so here, this is actually our disk image here. So we can see we have a free space of 32 gigs. So this disk size is 32 gigs. You can see it's named Peppermint OS. So of course I can come over here, hit my edit partitions. Anything I do on here, this is just impacting the virtual disk that is inside of here. And I'm not going to mess with this guy here. But that just should give you a, let me just quit the installer, yes. That should give you a brief overview of how to use and get started with virtual machine. So you can see it's fairly easy to use. It's fairly intuitive. This will enable you to download a Linux distribution on your current operating system and go ahead and give it a test. Now, of course, like I said, at the beginning of the video, if you have a very low spec machine, this is not going to work for you. If you're running an i5, 8 gigs of RAM, you'll be able to test out Linux distributions without a lot of problem. So there is getting started with using a virtual machine. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. You can follow along on the channel on the various social media posts. Those will be on the end screen there or in the description down below. And you can support the channel by having a look at switchedtolinux.com/support.